Good morning, YouTube. I'd like to make this little video today regarding, well, a bit of an opinion piece regarding, well, a popular opinion that you can find all over the internet regarding the usefulness or uselessness of certain styles or certain ways of practicing martial art. It's something that you see on a lot of martial arts videos, a lot of forums, where you have people, and I'm not pointing any fingers, but especially a lot of MMA or competitive fighting fans who seem to watch a lot of competitive fighting and think from that they can derive what is actually useful or useless in martial art. A lot of opinions about that style or that style of martial art, that way of practicing is basically BS. It's total useless. There is no use of using such techniques, etc., etc., etc. Now, my personal opinion, again, I have practiced martial art, studied martial art for about 20 years. I do have a first-degree black belt in Aikido. I'm a teacher of capoeira as well. Dabbled with some other styles of training, etc. So I do have some background into various martial arts, but my personal opinion is, well, basically that there is no useless style or no useless way of martial art. There is no useless training or there is no useless style of martial art. For, well, the simple fact, in large case, due to that, regarding to fighting or war, regarding to defending your safety, defending your life, people tend to get very practical in what they do. They tend to have a very practical approach in training, in indeed choosing weapons, in indeed working towards getting more proficient in fighting and war. For the simple reason that for most of our history, fighting, defending ourselves, waging war, we had to be very practical because, well, if we didn't, we usually ended up dead. And as a general rule of thumb, most people, I think, still like to live. So if we weren't practical as a species, as human beings, we didn't survive for very long. Which tends to make people very practical in what they do, very practical in weapons they choose, very practical in what they learn. Regarding martial art. Now, martial arts, if you look around the world, various styles of martial arts can be very diverse in their ways of training, in their ways of teaching, in the techniques they use, mainly due to culture, due to surroundings, due to indeed influences that they have had from other cultures or simply situations that they had to defend against. For example, cultures that knew or that faced armored opponents will have had different applications or different ways of training with or against armor than cultures like indeed Africa, like Latin America, where such things weren't as common. They developed different systems of working or training martial art. So indeed there are a lot of cultural and other differences that make that martial arts can be very diverse depending upon where they stem from. That's, well, a basic point. So a lot of techniques in certain martial arts can get very, how should we say, exotic, very creative, and sometimes indeed are impractical. Let's be honest about it. Some techniques are impractical. But then again, if they're not practical, why do them? Why learn them? Why train in using these impractical techniques? Well, a lot of it is due to the fact that there is indeed sense in training this way. There is indeed a reason why people train this way. It teaches things that are not always visible, if I have to say it like that, on the surface, but that teach an underlying thing, or that teach more than what is seen at first or at face value. Great example of that, as I said, I've trained 12 years of Aikido. Great example of that is what, for example, in Aikido is known as Ushiro Ryote Dori techniques. So basically where you get the opponent to grab you by one wrist or grab you by the arm, you divert the opponent around you and you try to get him to basically grab you from both arms from behind. From that, there's various defense techniques, various techniques on working with that. Now, if you were to look at that at face value again, I'm perfectly 100% convinced that no attacker is going to attack you that way. Never. It's just not going to happen. That doesn't mean that it is indeed a technique that doesn't have a direct application as to self-defense or as to fighting. Do I think for that it's a useless technique? Not at all. It was one of the things that I trained a lot for when I was studying towards the level of black belt, was indeed these techniques. And it came at a moment where I did indeed realize that it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about correct timing. It taught me a lot about correct stance. It taught me a great deal about indeed using proper balance, using proper technique, because it's a very hard technique to master. So it teaches you a lot about properly using the basic techniques that you are learned in martial art. It makes that you do indeed get more proficient at the practical techniques due to using an impractical way of training, if you must call it like that. That's just the way it is. So what is visible at first glance or at face value by somebody who doesn't understand it is not always what's happening, let's just say, underneath the skin. And that's, I think, a great truth with many martial arts. Again, I do believe that there is no useless way of training. There are, however, useless people or useless students as to martial arts. I think that that's in a great deal what makes or breaks people, or what sets the difference between a student of martial arts and a martial artist. An experienced martial artist knows how to derive, let's just say, practical application from what he's learned. Whereas a basic student will just see an exercise, do an exercise, and not understand what's going on, why he's learning something and what it's teaching him. And again, I think that's a bit the great difference between a true martial artist and a basic student of martial art. Being able to derive what is indeed useful in a practical sense, and what is indeed practice for the sake of practice and practice for the sake of getting better. I mean, even if you compare the entire situation to modern warfare, modern soldiers, I did spend a few years in the Belgian army. Again, a modern soldier is not always taught practical warfare. You are trained towards a lot of things. You are trained towards using various weapons, towards shooting, but you are not trained in the sense of, well, how should we put it? Pointing a gun at somebody, at another human being, and just shooting him to the point of killing him. You're not taught that. It's a very stressful thing, but you are not taught such things. You are taught how to shoot a target, but not how to kill somebody. You are not taught how to handle yourself under the stress of seeing your friends being riddled with machine gun fire or blown apart by grenades. That is a very great stress that not everybody can handle. Still, you're not trained for that. You are trained the basics to be ready, and indeed the difference between a seasoned soldier and a student or a basically trained person is indeed that. The fact that you can handle yourself practically on the battlefield when time arises, but you are not trained that. You're even trained on practical things. I mean, two things that I derived greatly from my time in the army was simply, and I think every soldier that ever did military training will say the same. The two things that I remember mostly is learning how to A, shine my shoes, and B, make my bed. What practical application does that have to war? None. You will not become a more experienced soldier or be more efficient at killing people just because you have shiny boots. However, again, there is a reasoning behind it. There is a reasoning why you are taught how to shine your shoes, how to clean your shoes, how to make your bed, how to properly pack your backpack, etc. The reasoning being that simply you are asked to maintain the state of your shoes, of your footwear, as a basic way of learning how to maintain and keep in order your affairs. They expect you to have clean shoes, so you have the logic to have, well, a clean rifle, or to keep a clean $100,000 piece of military equipment, to keep it in working and good functioning order. That is the underlying reason why you're taught this unpractical skill. I mean, in the olden days, it was usually very simple of how to weed out, let's just say, people that cut it or didn't. People were trained in useless or useful things, and basically if you were considered skilled enough, you were sent out to fight. That was the basic rule of thumb. And basically there was a simple way of weeding out good from bad. You were sent out to fight, you cut it, you survived. You didn't, you died. You know, in today's standard, as to today's maybe standard in respect of human life, it seems a bit a brutal way of handling things, but it was at least very practical. It was a very practical way of doing things. People that could handle themselves on the battlefield survived, and they kept on living and fighting living to fight another day. But again, that's my opinion. There is no useless way or no useless training or no useless style of martial art, but it is up to the user that trains in martial art to derive practical or useful technique from what is basically training. Training is there for a reason. Fighting or defending yourself or waging war is something totally different. And it is something you can't prepare people for. It's something they have to experience and something they have to learn from experience. But training is there for a reason. Useless things are there for a reason. People did not spend years and years developing a martial art basically for entertainment purposes, for sportive development. They didn't do that. They had to do it because they were facing threats, because they had to defend their life. And again, because the simple fact that people like to live, they usually were very practical in their application or in their study of defending themselves, armed, unarmed, or any other way. Simply, indeed, because if you weren't, you died. So again, people that valued their life were usually very practical. Even the useless stuff can be or can have a certain purpose, but that's to be understood, or that's, how should I say, that's something that can only be understood by practicing, getting good, and indeed learning the lessons that these techniques teach you. Just a small bit of a short opinion, but again, I don't believe that there is any useless form of martial art. There are, of course, useless people or people that don't draw the useful lessons from certain aspects of a martial art. But martial art is meant to be useful, as it's meant to defend people from harm.